The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace, as thousands of visitors gathered behind the metal barriers. Among them stood 8-year-old Emma Thompson, her small hands gripping the cold steel rail as she stretched on her tiptoes, desperately trying to catch a glimpse of the famous red-coated guards. Her bright blue eyes sparkled with excitement, but her face showed the telltale features of Down syndrome that made her mother, Sarah, instinctively protective in crowded places like this. Sarah watched her daughter with a mixture of joy and concern. They had traveled 300 miles from their small town in Yorkshire specifically for this moment. Emma had been fascinated by the royal guards ever since she saw them in a picture book at the library. For weeks, she had practiced marching around their living room, pretending to be one of the stoic soldiers in their tall black hats. The trip to London was Emma's reward for completing a full year of speech therapy, something that had required tremendous patience and determination from both mother and daughter. The crowd pressed closer as the changing of the guard ceremony approached. Emma's excitement was palpable, but her short stature meant she could barely see over the adults in front of her. She tugged at her mother's sleeve repeatedly, pointing toward where she hoped the guards would appear. Other tourists, absorbed in taking photos and chatting loudly, seemed oblivious to the small girl's struggle to see past them. Standing at attention just 20 feet away, Guardsman James Mitchell noticed the commotion. At 26 years old, he had been stationed at Buckingham Palace for 2 years, long enough to become accustomed to the daily crowds and their various requests. His training had been rigorous and clear. Maintain position, keep tourists behind the barriers, and never break protocol regardless of the circumstances. The royal guards were symbols of unwavering discipline and tradition, and any deviation from their duties could result in serious consequences. Yet something about the little girl's determination caught his attention. While other children in the crowd seemed distracted or restless, Emma's focus was absolute. She never stopped trying to see, never gave up hope that she might catch a glimpse of the guards she had dreamed of meeting. Her mother's gentle encouragement and the way she lovingly smoothed Emma's hair showed Mitchell that this was more than just a casual tourist visit. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes, and the crowd continued to swell. Emma's frustration was beginning to show as taller people moved in front of her, completely blocking her view. She tried jumping, but her coordination wasn't quite right, and she nearly lost her balance. Sarah steadied her daughter while scanning the crowd, wondering if they should try to find a different viewing spot, though everywhere seemed equally packed. Mitchell found himself checking on the little girl more frequently than his training would normally permit. He noticed how she never complained or cried despite her obvious disappointment. Instead, she kept trying different angles, moving slightly left and right along the barrier, hoping to find even the smallest gap through, which she could see. Her persistence reminded him of his own childhood determination, though his had been focused on rugby rather than royal guards. The other guards maintained their positions with mechanical precision, their eyes fixed straight ahead as they had been trained. But Mitchell couldn't shake the feeling that something special was happening just beyond his reach. This wasn't just another day of routine duty. It was a moment that could mean everything to one small girl who had traveled so far for this single opportunity. As the minutes ticked by, Emma's mother began to realize that her daughter might not be able to see the ceremony after all. The disappointment in Sarah's eyes was evident as she considered their options. They had spent their savings on this trip, and there wouldn't be another opportunity like this for a very long time. The weight of potentially disappointing her special needs daughter pressed heavily on her heart. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the courtyard as the incoming guard regiment began their march toward the palace gates. Emma's excitement reached a fever pitch as she heard the rhythmic sound of boots on stone, but her view remained completely blocked. The moment she had dreamed of for months was about to begin, and she was going to miss it entirely. The distant sound of military drums began to echo through the palace courtyard, signaling the start of the ceremony that Emma had waited so long to see. Her face pressed against the cold metal barrier as she made one final desperate attempt to peer through the forest of legs and bodies in front of her. The crowd's excitement was building to a crescendo, with cameras being raised and voices becoming louder. But for Emma, The anticipation was mixed with the crushing realization that she might not see anything at all. Guardsman Mitchell watched the scene unfold before him, his training warring with his human instincts. Every fiber of his military discipline told him to maintain his position and focus on his duties. But the sight of Emma's determined struggle touched something deep within him. He had witnessed thousands of tourists over the years, but none had shown the pure, innocent dedication that this little girl displayed. Her joy wasn't about getting the perfect photograph or bragging to friends. It was about experiencing something magical that had captured her imagination. Sarah knelt down beside her daughter, whispering words of comfort while trying to hide her own disappointment. She had promised Emma this experience, and seeing her daughter's dream slipping away felt like a personal failure. The other tourists around them were too absorbed in their own excitement to notice the small drama playing out at their feet. Sarah considered lifting Emma onto her shoulders, but the crowd was so dense that even that wouldn't provide a clear view of the ceremony. The approaching guard regiment came into view at the far end of the courtyard, their red tunics brilliant in the morning sunlight and their black bearskin hats adding to their imposing presence. The crowd surged forward slightly, everyone eager to get the best possible view, which only made Emma's situation worse. She was now completely hidden behind a wall of adults, some of whom were holding their phones high above their heads to record the ceremony. Mitchell noticed that his fellow guards remained perfectly still, their eyes fixed straight ahead in the traditional manner. They had been trained to ignore distractions and focus solely on their ceremonial duties. Any break in protocol would be noted by their superiors and could result in disciplinary action. The guards were not just soldiers, they were living symbols of British tradition and royal protocol, expected to maintain their composure under all circumstances. But as the ceremony began in earnest, Mitchell found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Emma's small figure. She had stopped trying to jump or move around and instead stood very still, listening intently to the sounds of the approaching guards. Her hands remained clasped on the barrier, and her face showed a mixture of wonder and sadness. She seemed to understand that hearing the ceremony would have to be enough, even though it fell far short of her dreams. The crowd's energy was electric as the guards marched closer, their synchronized steps creating a rhythmic drumbeat against the cobblestones. Tourists pointed excitedly and called out to friends, completely unaware of the small girl who was missing the very thing they were all there to see. Sarah placed a protective arm around Emma's shoulders, torn between wanting to push through the crowd and maintaining the polite behavior she had always taught her daughter. Mitchell's internal struggle intensified as he watched Emma's quiet acceptance of her disappointment. Here was a child who had clearly overcome many obstacles in her young life, who had traveled hundreds of miles for this moment, and who was facing yet another barrier that seemed impossible to cross. Her dignity in the face of disappointment struck him as more noble than anything he had witnessed in his military career. The sound of the band grew louder, and the crowd's excitement reached its peak. Emma closed her eyes and listened carefully, trying to paint a picture in her mind of what she couldn't see. Her mother watched her daughter's face, seeing the way Emma was working so hard to make the best of a difficult situation. The love and pride in Sarah's expression was unmistakable, even as her heart broke for her daughter's missed opportunity. As the guards drew nearer to their position, Mitchell made a decision that would change everything. Years of training and protocol suddenly seemed less important than the quiet courage of one small girl who had asked for nothing more than the chance to see something beautiful. He knew that what he was about to do could have serious consequences for his career. But in that moment, the risk seemed insignificant compared to Emma's disappointment. The ceremony continued around them, but for Mitchell, Emma, and Sarah, time seemed to slow down as a moment of human connection was about to transcend the rigid boundaries of military protocol. Without warning, Mitchell stepped away from his post and approached the barrier where Emma stood. The movement was so unexpected that several tourists nearby stopped talking and stared in surprise. Royal guards simply didn't move from their positions during ceremonies. It was unheard of. Sarah looked up in shock as the tall soldier in his immaculate red tunic and towering black hat approached them, her protective instincts immediately kicking in as she wondered what her daughter might have done wrong. Mitchell's heart pounded as he reached the barrier, knowing that every step took him further from protocol and deeper into uncharted territory. His commanding officers were watching from various positions around the courtyard, and he could already imagine their reactions to his unprecedented behavior. But when he looked down at Emma's upturned face, filled with wonder and confusion, he knew he had made the right choice. "Would you like a better view, young lady?" Mitchell asked softly, his voice carrying the crisp accent of his military training but tempered with genuine warmth. Emma's eyes widened in disbelief, and she looked quickly to her mother for permission to respond. Sarah was speechless, caught between gratitude and concern about whether this interaction was appropriate or if they were somehow in trouble. The crowd around them began to notice the unusual scene unfolding. Cameras turned from the approaching ceremony to focus on the guard who had broken ranks to speak to a small girl. Murmurs rippled through the gathered tourists as they tried to understand what was happening. Some seemed annoyed that their view was being blocked, while others appeared curious about this departure from the usual rigid ceremony. Emma nodded eagerly in response to Mitchell's question, her face lighting up with a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire courtyard. Without hesitation, Mitchell reached over the barrier and gently lifted her up, positioning her on his shoulders where she would have an unobstructed view of the entire ceremony. The crowd gasped at this unprecedented breach of protocol, and several people began recording the moment with their phones. From her new vantage point, Emma could see everything she had dreamed of. The approaching guards in their perfect formation, their brass buttons gleaming in the sunlight, their synchronized movements creating a display of precision and pageantry that exceeded even her vivid imagination. Her joy was infectious, and even the initially surprised tourists began to smile as they witnessed her pure delight. Sarah watched with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the kindness of this stranger who had risked his career to give her daughter this moment. She wanted to thank him, to explain how much this meant to them, but the words seemed inadequate for such an extraordinary gesture. Instead, she simply stood there, her hand over her heart, watching her daughter experience the magic she had promised her. The other guards maintained their positions, though several glanced in Mitchell's direction with expressions that ranged from surprise to concern. They all knew the rules as well as he did, and they understood the potential consequences of his actions. Some admired his compassion, while others worried about the precedent he was setting and the reaction of their superiors. Mitchell stood perfectly still, holding Emma securely as the ceremony continued around them. Despite the attention they were receiving, he focused entirely on ensuring that Emma felt safe and could see everything she wanted to see. Her excitement was palpable as she pointed at different guards and whispered observations to him, her voice filled with the wonder that only a child could express. The approaching regiment was now close enough that Emma could see the individual faces of the guards, their serious expressions and professional bearing making them seem like characters from her favorite storybook. She waved tentatively at them, not expecting a response but unable to contain her enthusiasm. To her amazement, one of the marching guards gave her the slightest nod, a gesture so subtle that only she seemed to notice it. As the ceremony reached its climax, with the old guard being replaced by the new in a display of timeless tradition, Emma had the perfect view of everything she had dreamed of seeing. Her happiness was complete, but she was also acutely aware that this magical moment was happening because a kind stranger had chosen to break the rules for her. Even at her young age, she understood that this was something special, something that went far beyond the ceremony itself. The crowd around them had grown quieter, many people now more interested in watching Emma's reactions than in the ceremony itself. Her pure joy and the guard's unexpected kindness had created a moment of human connection that transcended the formal nature of the royal event. It was a reminder that beneath all the pageantry and protocol, there were real people with real hearts capable of extraordinary compassion. As the changing of the guard ceremony reached its conclusion, Mitchell carefully lifted Emma down from his shoulders and gently placed her back on the ground beside her mother. The little girl's face was radiant with joy, her eyes sparkling with the memory of everything she had just witnessed. She looked up at Mitchell with such pure gratitude that he felt his throat tighten with emotion, despite his military training to remain composed at all times. "Thank you," Emma whispered, her voice soft but filled with sincerity that touched Mitchell's heart. She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a drawing she had made during their journey to London. It was a crayon picture of a red-coated guard standing in front of Buckingham Palace, created with the careful attention to detail that only a child who truly cares about something can achieve. She held it up to Mitchell with both hands, offering it as her gift to him. Mitchell accepted, the drawing with the same solemnity he would have shown to a military decoration. He studied the colorful image, noting how Emma had drawn the guard with a smile, something that would never appear on an actual royal guard's face during duty. But in that moment, he understood that Emma had captured something more important than accuracy. She had drawn her vision of kindness and joy, the very qualities that had motivated his decision to break protocol. Sarah finally found her voice, though it was thick with emotion as she spoke. "I don't know how to thank you," she said to Mitchell. "Emma has been looking forward to this for months. She practices marching at home and salutes everyone she meets. You've made her dream come true." Her words carried the weight of a mother's gratitude, and Mitchell could see in her eyes the same determination and strength that Emma had displayed while trying to see over the crowd. The ceremony had officially ended, but the crowd remained, many people still watching the interaction between the guard and the little girl. Several tourists approached Sarah to express their admiration for what they had witnessed, and some asked if they could take pictures with Emma. She had become a small celebrity, though she seemed more interested in talking to Mitchell than in the attention from strangers. Other guards began to move back to their regular positions, and Mitchell knew that he would soon have to account for his actions to his commanding officer. The weight of potential consequences began to settle on his shoulders, but when he looked at Emma's happy face, he felt no regret about his decision. Some things, he realized, were more important than following rules, especially when those rules prevented a child from experiencing wonder and joy. Emma's newfound confidence was evident as she began asking Mitchell questions about being a guard. She wanted to know if he lived in the palace, whether he knew the queen, and if all guards were as tall as he was. Her curiosity was endless, and Mitchell found himself answering her questions with more warmth and personality than he had ever shown while on duty. For a few precious minutes, he was no longer just a ceremonial figure. He was a real person connecting with a remarkable child. Sarah watched the interaction with amazement, seeing how Mitchell's kindness had transformed her daughter's entire demeanor. Emma was typically shy around strangers, especially adults in uniform, but she was chatting with Mitchell as if they were old friends. The guard's genuine interest in her questions and his patient answers showed Sarah that his act of kindness wasn't just a momentary impulse. It reflected his true character. As other guards passed by, some nodded approvingly at Mitchell, while others maintained their stoic expressions. The reaction from his peers was mixed, but Mitchell sensed that most of them understood why he had acted as he did. They had all seen countless tourists over the years, but Emma's situation was unique, and her response to his kindness had touched everyone who witnessed it. The crowd began to disperse as people headed off to other tourist attractions, but Emma seemed reluctant to leave. She kept looking back at Mitchell, as if trying to memorize every detail of his appearance so she could remember this moment forever. Sarah gently encouraged her daughter to say goodbye, knowing that they had already received far more kindness than they had any right to expect. But the story was far from over. As Mitchell prepared to return to his duties, he noticed a figure in a crisp military uniform approaching from across the courtyard. His commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, was walking directly toward them with an expression that Mitchell couldn't quite read. The moment of reckoning for his breach of protocol was about to arrive, and Mitchell straightened his shoulders, ready to accept whatever consequences awaited him. Emma sensed the change in Mitchell's demeanor and looked around to see what had caught his attention. When she spotted the approaching officer, she instinctively moved closer to her mother, though her eyes remained fixed on Mitchell with concern. Even at her young age, she understood that the kind guard who had helped her might be in trouble because of his kindness to her. Colonel Harrison approached with the measured stride of a career military officer, his face maintaining the neutral expression that came from decades of command experience. Mitchell snapped to attention, prepared to accept full responsibility for his breach of protocol. Sarah instinctively placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder, worried that their presence might somehow make the situation worse for the kind guard who had shown them such unexpected compassion. To everyone's surprise, Colonel Harrison stopped directly in front of Emma, rather than addressing Mitchell first. The distinguished officer, whose chest bore numerous medals and ribbons from years of distinguished service, lowered himself to Emma's eye level with a gentleness that seemed to contradict his imposing military bearing. His weathered face softened as he looked at the little girl who had unknowingly caused such an unprecedented break in royal protocol. "Young lady," Colonel Harrison said, in a voice that was both authoritative and kind, "I understand you've had quite an adventure today." Emma nodded shyly, clutching her mother's hand while looking between the colonel and Mitchell with obvious concern for her new friend. She had heard enough adult conversations to understand that Mitchell might be in trouble, and the worry in her eyes was unmistakable. The colonel examined the drawing that Emma had given to Mitchell, which the guard still held carefully in his hands. A slow smile spread across Harrison's face as he studied the colorful crayon artwork, noting the same details that Mitchell had observed. The guard in Emma's picture was smiling, surrounded by flowers and sunshine, representing not the rigid formality of actual royal protocol but the joy and wonder that the ceremony had inspired in a special little girl. "This is quite remarkable artwork," Colonel Harrison said to Emma, his voice carrying genuine appreciation rather than the patronizing tone adults sometimes used with children. "Would it be all right if I kept a copy of this? I think it captures something very important about what we do here." Emma nodded eagerly, thrilled that someone else appreciated her artistic efforts and seemingly unaware of the deeper significance of the colonel's request. Sarah watched the exchange with growing amazement, beginning to realize that this encounter might not end with punishment for Mitchell after all. The colonel's demeanor suggested something entirely different, though she didn't dare hope for the best outcome. Her experience as a mother of a special needs child had taught her that kindness from strangers was rare and precious, but she had also learned not to expect too much from people in positions of authority. Colonel Harrison stood and finally turned, his attention to Mitchell, who remained at perfect attention despite the highly unusual circumstances surrounding them. The other guards in the vicinity had noticed their commanding officer's presence and were watching the scene with intense curiosity. Such personal interactions during duty hours were virtually unheard of, especially involving civilians and breaches of protocol. "Guardsman Mitchell," the colonel began, his voice carrying the weight of military authority, "your actions today were completely contrary to established protocol and procedures." Mitchell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and he prepared to accept whatever disciplinary action was deemed appropriate. Emma looked up at her mother with tears forming in her eyes, finally understanding that Mitchell was indeed in trouble because he had been kind to her. But Colonel Harrison's next words surprised everyone present. They were also exactly what any decent human being would have done in the same circumstances. The relief that washed over Mitchell's face was subtle but unmistakable, and Sarah felt her own tension begin to ease. Emma didn't fully understand the formal language, but she sensed from the adults' reactions that things might be turning out better than she had feared. "Sometimes," the colonel continued, "the spirit of our duty is more important than the letter of our regulations. Our role here is to serve the crown and the people of Britain, and today you served a very special young citizen in the finest tradition of the Guard." His words carried a weight that went far beyond military protocol, speaking to the deeper purpose behind their ceremonial duties. The crowd of remaining tourists had grown quiet, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. Several people continued to record the interaction, understanding instinctively that this was a moment worth preserving. The contrast between the formal military setting and the deeply human story unfolding before them created a powerful scene that would be remembered long after the ceremony itself was forgotten. Emma stepped forward, her natural empathy overriding her shyness as she addressed Colonel Harrison directly. "Please don't be mad at him," she said in her clear, earnest voice. "He was just being nice to me because I couldn't see. He's the best guard in the whole world." Her innocent defense of Mitchell touched everyone present, including the colonel, whose experienced eyes showed a flash of emotion at her heartfelt words. The tension that had built up over the past few minutes began to dissolve as it became clear that Mitchell would not face punishment for his compassionate act. But the story was about to take another unexpected turn, one that would transform a single moment of kindness into something much larger and more meaningful than anyone present could have anticipated. Colonel Harrison reached into his uniform jacket and withdrew something that made Mitchell's eyes widen in surprise. It was an official invitation, bearing the royal seal, that had been prepared earlier that morning for an entirely different purpose. With a slight smile, the colonel handed the invitation to Emma, whose small hands trembled as she accepted the formal document with its gold embossing and elegant script. "Miss Emma," Colonel Harrison said formally, "by special invitation of Her Majesty's Guard, you and your mother are invited to attend a private viewing of the state apartments tomorrow morning, followed by tea with the guard officers." Emma's mouth fell open in astonishment and Sarah gasped, unable to believe what she was hearing. The invitation represented an honor that even wealthy tourists with connections could rarely obtain. The colonel explained that Emma's drawing and her obvious love for the royal traditions had impressed everyone who had witnessed the morning's events. Several senior officers had observed Mitchell's actions and Emma's joyful response, and they had quickly reached a consensus that this special little girl deserved recognition for the happiness she had brought to what was normally a routine ceremonial duty. Emma looked up at her mother with eyes shining with excitement, hardly able to comprehend that their wonderful day was about to become even more magical. Sarah struggled to find words adequate to express her gratitude, overwhelmed by the generosity being shown to them by complete strangers. The kindness that had begun with one guard's compassionate decision was now extending throughout the entire organization. Mitchell felt a surge of pride and satisfaction that had nothing to do with military achievements or career advancement. Seeing Emma's happiness and knowing that his decision had led to this extraordinary opportunity filled him with a deeper sense of purpose than any formal recognition could have provided. He understood that he had been part of something truly special, a moment when rigid rules had given way to human compassion with beautiful results. The news of Emma's story began to spread beyond the palace walls within hours. Tourists who had witnessed the events shared photos and videos on social media, and news outlets picked up the heartwarming story of the guard who broke protocol to help a little girl with special needs see the changing of the guard ceremony. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with people from around the world expressing their admiration for Mitchell's kindness and the guard's gracious response. Emma's drawing, which Mitchell had carefully preserved, became a symbol of the day's events. Copies were made and distributed among the guard officers, and the original was framed and displayed in the officers' mess as a reminder that their duties extended far beyond ceremonial procedures. The colorful crayon artwork served as a daily reminder that their ultimate purpose was to serve and inspire the people they were sworn to protect. The following morning's private tour exceeded even Emma's wildest dreams. She met other guards, learned about the history of the palace, and was treated with the same respect and attention normally reserved for visiting dignitaries. Her natural curiosity and infectious enthusiasm charmed everyone she encountered, and by the end of the visit she had collected contact information from several officers who promised to stay in touch with her. Sarah returned to Yorkshire with a renewed faith in human kindness and a deeper appreciation for the people who choose to serve others, even when it requires personal sacrifice. The trip that had begun as a reward for Emma's hard work in speech therapy had become a life-changing experience that would influence both mother and daughter for years to come. Mitchell's career was not harmed by his decision to break protocol. Instead, he became something of a legend within the Guard, known as the soldier who remembered that rules should serve people, not the other way around. His story was used in training sessions as an example of how true leadership sometimes requires the courage to do what's right, rather than what's prescribed. Years later, Emma would often return to London with her mother, always stopping by Buckingham Palace to wave at the guards on duty. She eventually became an advocate for people with special needs, inspired by the day when a kind stranger showed her that barriers exist only until someone decides to remove them. The drawing she had given to Mitchell remained one of her most treasured memories, a reminder of the day when compassion triumphed over protocol and created a moment of magic that would never be forgotten. The story of the Royal Guard who broke Protocol for a Little Girl became more than just a heartwarming news story. It became a testament to the power of human kindness and the importance of seeing beyond rules to recognize moments when compassion is the highest form of duty.